To preface this video, I want to mention that I have been a fan of Doctor Who since it restarted with Christopher Eccleston back in 2005, and I have watched every series since and pretty much enjoyed it on a declining level since David Tennant left. And I just thought the most recent series of Doctor Who, which I watched all the way through, was utterly dreadful and so bad that I have to make a feature-length review of everything that went wrong. I will try and be as objective as I can be, but obviously given that this is somewhat my opinion as well, I understand my bias has got to get in there. So I'm basically going to try and keep everything backed up with evidence that we can see from things inside the show and out. So without further ado, here is my critique of Season 11 of Doctor Who. So to start with, I want to get a few things out of the way first. I consider every time that the Doctor regenerates to be a reboot, as there is a complete new set of characters. The character of Doctor Who is completely different to the one we had last time, and due to this, I think it's fair to call this series of Doctor Who yet another soft reboot. Due to the nature of reboots and the completely different artistic direction they usually take, I thought it was a good idea to try and find out what direction this was, and what better place to do it than find out what the lead actor was trying to do. So shortly after Jodie Whittaker was announced as the new Doctor, there was an interview on the Doctor Who website with questions asked such as, why did you want the role, with Whittaker answering, to be asked to play the ultimate character, to get to play pretend in the truest form. This is why I wanted to be an actor in the first place, to be able to play something who is literally reinvented on screen, with all the freedoms that brings. What an unbelievable opportunity, and added to that to be the first woman in that role. It's always great to see an actor loving the role that they've been chosen for, isn't it? But then the questions get a bit more, although they shouldn't be, let's say political. What does it feel like to be the first woman Doctor? Jodie replies, it feels completely overwhelming. As a feminist, as a woman, as an actor, as a human, as someone who wants to be continually push themselves and challenge themselves, and not be boxed in by what you're told and what you can and can't be. It feels incredible. I mean, it must be something to be the first Doctor. I mean, it must have been odd to be the first Master when she came about. I mean, it was only written in by Moffat to seem progressive on his end, and now all of a sudden we'll get women Doctors. But I do have to mention that asking these loaded questions and answering them in such a way as a feminist and all other type of politically correct language, it's not exactly going to put to rest people's minds who are sceptical about the whole thing, unfortunately. Of course, it can't get any worse than that, can it? What do you want to tell the fans? The interviewer asks, and Jodie replies, I want to tell the fans to not be scared of my gender, because it's a really exciting time and Doctor Who represents everything that's exciting about change. The fans have lived through so many changes, and this is only a new different one, not a fearful one. You couldn't make it sound any more like a revolution of Doctor Who if you tried. It's an unfortunate situation. Now give me a sec, let me just explain what I mean by this. You see, if you really want a crash course with what I mean, then I'd suggest watching Dave Cullen's video on the vandalisation of Doctor Who. It's completely about how the last few series of Doctor Who have had nothing but jokes degrading men, with absolutely none of it going the other way. And that's really annoyed quite a few fans, because it's so obvious how one-sided and how much behind the feminist cause that Stephen Moffat was trying to get in his writing. So, of course, when you get Jodie Whittaker outright saying she's a feminist, and most of the BBC seeming to have quite a progressive view on things, you get quite worried for the state of what the script's going to be. Which is why she has felt the need to say, don't worry, this change is good. This is why it sounds like a revolution, and this is why it sounds pretty bad to people like me who are very sceptical about the direction that Doctor Who is going. It was also pointed out by Peter Davison, an ex-Doctor Who, that he said that she was a terrific actress, but if he feels any doubts, it is the loss of a role model for boys who think Doctor Who is vitally important. So, really, what choice are you going to give them now? He went ahead and conceded that his views are probably due to him being so old, and he got hit back by Colin Baker, another ex-Doctor who was saying that it was absolute rubbish. They've had 50 years of having a male role model, so he's talking rubbish about the Doctor taking away a role model for boys, which, in a way, they both have a point, I suppose. But I want to get across my own perspective here. According to Robert Greene's Laws of Power, Law 41 avoids stepping into a great man's shoes. I feel this is exactly what they've tried to do with Jodie Whittaker. In a stage in our politics where feminism seems so far at the forefront, especially in the BBC, you can tell that they are trying to put women in places that men always were, to say, we are as good as you. The problem with this, as it explained in Law 41, is that when you try and do this, you end up having to put in extra work and make yourself seem about 3 times as great to even seem comparable to the old one. And that burden has been placed squarely on Jodie Whittaker's shoulders. This seemed an even more difficult task, given that in all the promotional material it was clear that there were going to be 3 companions. And trying to be the Doctor with 3 companions is a difficult thing, as been shown in previous episodes. Unless the companions are very good at bouncing off one another, which has been very hard to write, as Stephen Moffat's 3 companions with Matt Smith seem to be, then she didn't have much of a chance to begin with. To sum my introduction up, I suppose I should just conclude with, it is clear that there is a feminist agenda in Doctor Who, as with Stephen Moffat's writing, in that he would just constantly degrade men and never touch women, and he even had the audacity to put a line in saying, what is it going to be, all women in the future, said by the old master, and the Doctor saying, hopefully, or we can only dream, or something like that. It is clear that they have gone for an agenda in the past, so that is fresh in everyone's mind, and then we all of a sudden get a female Doctor, and she is going on about how this is great for feminism and for womankind, so to speak. That puts a worry in people who are sceptical's mind, and that caused a lot of people to just not want to watch it altogether. But now we should talk about what the producers of the show wanted, and it seems very clear cut to me. There aren't too many interviews of Chris Chibnall before the series of Doctor Who was released, but from what I can gather from this interview from the official Doctor Who website, when asked, do viewers need to have seen Doctor Who before, he says, not at all, this series is a perfect stepping point. And throughout the whole 3 paragraphs of him pontificating, he basically says, it's not a reboot, but it is, and it's not really worth going through. I mean, honestly, if you're going to say things about how there's a whole new jolt of energy into the show, and also how new characters are going to make you rethink how stories work, this is exactly how people describe reboots, and yet you have the audacity to say it's not a reboot, it's just that great. Well, I can't say I have high expectations when you don't even understand the own words you're using. The more interesting half of the interview is when asked what can viewers expect from this series, and Chibnall replies, you can expect emotion, you can expect action and adventure and monsters as far off planets and huge alien vistas. You can expect a lot of humour, a lot of warmth and some great characters. 4 great new friends for you all to meet as they go through the past, present and future and meet some incredible people from history and go and battle on alien planets and fight threats closer to home. It's really a whole array of different stories, 10 individual stories that show off the range of the 13th Doctor and her friends, but also of the show as a whole. I hope you can expect everything you've ever loved about Doctor Who. More than anything, it's hopefully incredibly entertaining, and I think this series has something for absolutely everyone. If you've seen Doctor Who before, I hope we're going to be giving you all the stuff you love. If you've never seen it before, this is the place to start, and I think you're falling for a rollicking ride. Now, I understand that he's not trying to give away any episode in particular or anything like that, but he is really just making it sound like standard Doctor Who from this point, while also trying to say that it's a reboot without saying it's a reboot. But I think that's an important point to make. From this interview, it has been made clear that there will be no overarching story, but in previous series of Doctor Who there has been an overarching story throughout the season. For example, in Season 3, where at the end, the Master had stored his memories in a fob watch to disguise himself as a professor who is helping to save his people, directly referencing an earlier episode where the Doctor did the same thing. He also happens to be a Time Lord, which was implied by the face of Bo when he told the Doctor, "You are not alone," also in an earlier episode. He then goes to modern day Earth to win an election for Prime Minister, as under the name Saxon, which is alluded to throughout the episodes throughout the season where the Doctor is in the modern day world. I won't spoil any more, but you do get the point. The series was all building to something, there was always something to allude to, and when it all came back it was very satisfying to the viewer to watch. We have been told that there is absolutely none of this clever and intelligent storytelling in this season. Long-time fans of Doctor Who may find this lost aspect in this season to be a disappointment. So to sum up what we know. 1, we know that there has been a feminist agenda in Doctor Who for the past few years, and this time doesn't seem to be any different according to Jodie Whittaker. Number 2, it's not a reboot, but it is described exactly as one. And finally, there is no overarching story or mystery which will take away from the storytelling. All in all, I think that this all shows why people were put off from it in the first place. The female actress Jodie Whittaker is explaining, don't be afraid, this is a big change but it won't hurt anyone, and Chris Chibnall is trying his best to convince himself that it is not a reboot when it absolutely is. Honestly, I can see why people were put off from this new series in the first place, but I actually watched it, so I think it's time to actually get into the show and the problems with it. The writing in this season of Doctor Who is, to put it quite frank, been dismal. And there are a number of reasons for this, but the reason I'm going to go into for now is the whole mantra of show don't tell. It is a standard in visual media trying to show a story that it is better to show the audience that a thing is happening rather than tell the audience that a thing has happened or is happening. Action over exposition, to put it bluntly. Examples of feelings conveyed, actions taking place, and believable character reactions take place all throughout the Russell T Davies series, which is what I will focus on because I think it gives the best examples. Of course, he put in exposition when necessary, and I think a single scene from the first series with Christopher Eccleston cogently shows what I mean. The Doctor has heard a distress call from an alien ship, and it turns out a collector is there who collects and forces into cages living aliens and other off-world things. And he asks the Doctor to help him with one of his samples, and this is the scene that takes place.
I've come to help. I'm the Doctor. Impossible.
Doctor! Exterminate! Exterminate! Exterminate!
Sure, it's gonna kill him.
It's talking.
You are an enemy of the Daleks! You must be destroyed!
It's not working.
I am certain that if you're watching this you already know that Daleks are the Doctor's single greatest enemy, and they are essentially space Nazis. In fact, keep that in mind, because later in this video I will bring that point up again and really nail it down. However, back to the scene. The Dalek is the single greatest and most dangerous enemy of the Doctor, which you can tell even if you didn't know this, because the Doctor first says impossible and then goes into a real panic trying to get out of the room. You can tell the collector when it goes to the scene with the CCTV that he only has one thing on his mind, and that is making the Dalek talk so he can understand it more. These character motivations are clear and they are conveyed in a simple 10-second scene. After this, the Doctor works out that the Dalek's gun isn't working as he is still alive, and breathes a sigh of relief and actually laughs at it, because the thing that is supposed to be the most dangerous creature in the world has been effectively neutered, and the Doctor knows this, and instantly this is conveyed as relief and happiness in him. The scene goes on and the Doctor gives exposition that the Daleks are all wiped out by him, and so were the Time Lords. Now this is pure exposition, but it makes sense in this case because there is no way the audience will have known by now that the Doctor had done this. It also gives a real depth into why the Doctor has reacted the way he did. But I won't give any more away. I really think you should watch this episode. I think it's one of the strongest episodes of Doctor Who ever with a Dalek. Of course, there are more scenes like this all the way throughout Russell T Davies' series, but now I think it's time to talk about the series that we came here to talk about, and that is Series 11. As you have probably guessed, Series 11 is full of nothing but exposition, and rarely actually shows the audience something instead of telling them. Now this happens in every episode of Doctor Who, even the ones that Chris Chibnall didn't personally write, and that only accounts for 3 of them. But I'm going to focus on some examples that really show that Chris Chibnall is more about exposition than he is about anything else. I will say now that due to the recent nature of the new Doctor Who series, I'm only going to show stills of the latest series and explain and describe what is going on within the scenes. Hopefully this will be enough to convey my point. So let's start with one of the most prevalent examples of exposition over anything else. So in the first episode, when we see the monster, which by the way I really like the monster, he comes out of his capsule and someone asks him where his sister is. They have a back and forth and then he eventually puts his hand on his head and kills him, and you're not sure why. You then see the monster bend down and rip something off and you don't see what it is. Later on in the episode, when it is found by the Doctor and the gang, they just give out exposition saying initially, I've never seen injuries like this, and then go into detail about what they can all see, which is the guy's jaw had apparently been ripped off and a tooth had been taken out. As an idea this is fine, but the way that this is shown in the episode is rather poor, from a show don't tell perspective. You see, the injury should have been implied. It was fine up to the point that he ripped the thing off, but then it should have shown him then ripping out a tooth, looking at it and keeping it for safekeeping. That would have been enough to imply what had happened, and there would be no need for the exposition of he ripped his jaw off and took a tooth out. As we would have known a tooth had been taken out, and we wouldn't have seen more injuries, but we could see that they were horrific from their reactions, and it could have just been left at, oh, I've never seen injuries like this. And that would have been much better from a storytelling perspective. Because if all the characters can clearly see a horrific injury, there would be no need for this exposition, since this exposition is clearly just for the audience. You may call this nitpicking, but when your character acts really unnaturally in your first episode, that's not really a good bar to set for the rest of your series in terms of writing. And call it nitpicking all you want, but in the next week's episode, when they are on a mysterious planet and have to race to try and find their TARDIS, known as the Ghost Monument in this episode, they end up having to cross a body of water. Now this may not seem dangerous, but it only seems dangerous after the Doctor scans the water and says there is flesh-eating bugs in there. And the only thing shown to show that there is any type of danger in there is that you see one single ribbon left on the side of a log that was in there. There's absolutely nothing shown and absolutely nothing comes of this. It is just told to us. This is awful. You have someone drop their meat or something in it. There was already an episode of Doctor Who where the Shadows ate things, and it was initially shown by throwing a chicken drumstick in there that was instantly eaten. Have someone do that. There's an example of how to do this well, Chibnall.
Man-eating swarm. The piranhas of the air. The Vashta Narada. Literally the shadows that melt the flesh. Most planets have them, but usually in small clusters.
Now which was better? That or simply scanning the water with a sonic screwdriver, saying I found some microbial flesh-eating viruses, and then saying that it's a dangerous planet? Exposition or showing, which would you prefer someone tell me? Now this is a problem that continues throughout Chibnall's episodes, but there's still a huge example that I think I should go through. So in the season finale, yes, the season finale, this is the big episode, the thing that the whole show should lead up to, but as we have already known from Chibnall, there is no such thing as an overarching story in this season. Because of this, he has to artificially raise the stakes, and he does this by having the Doctor scan a planet and exposition how it's basically a planet that can mess with your mind. The Doctor quickly describes it as an effect that distorts reality and creates mood swings. Also, when the planet's name is translated, it means disintegrator of the soul, so he's made the planet a danger. The way the Doctor counters this is by having everyone put on a little device on their temple that stops the brainwaves. Now this is fine. And by what I mean by that is, it is fine as long as you actually have some danger should they say take it off. Well, later in the episode, that's what the Doctor and Yaz do. And when they take off their devices, all that the planet does, and I am serious here, it gives them a bit of a headache, and when the problem that they had to take their devices off for is over, they put them straight back on with absolutely no consequences. Chibnall, you're writing a finale to Doctor Who? There's supposed to be some sort of consequences? Something really bad happens to the Doctor or his companion throughout the Russell T Davies series in the last episode. The Doctor dies in the first one and has to regenerate. In the second season, Rose gets transported to a parallel universe where she can never see the Doctor again. Martha sees the destruction of Earth and then after that realises that she has bigger things to do in terms of her own life than go travelling with the Doctor. And the final episode of Russell T Davies' series, Donna has to have her memory erased because she can't cope with having the mind of a Time Lord. You had a planet that you said can cause distortions in people's reality, and you do absolutely nothing with it apart from give the first alien you see amnesia. Is that it? Really? Have some imagination. In an earlier episode it was established that there were giant spiders that all the companions had seen. You could have established that Yaz was deathly afraid of spiders, so the planet attacks that fear and just shows her giant spiders everywhere. That would have been a good callback, but of course you can't have an overarching story like that, because from what I can tell you're just lazy. There are more examples of this, but they will all naturally come around when I go into more critiques about the characters and themes of the show. But for now I want to get into another point of writing, and that is lack of imagination, specifically when it comes to aliens. Now I'm going to do some quick counting, but first I need to define what I actually mean by alien here. I will define an alien as any type of creature that doesn't look human, or looks human and has something outlandish about it that makes it monstrous. So for example, the empty child is a human who has something affecting it to make it monstrous or scary. It would count as part of my alien monster count. However, the pregnant man from the latest series would not count, as this doesn't make it monstrous or scary, it just makes it outlandish. I would like to also point out that I'm counting two-parter episodes in the first season of Doctor Who, which is the only one I'm going to be counting in, as one whole episode, so that the count is fair, as each series will then have 10 episodes each. Also for ease, I will just count one episode having one alien defined as before in to make counting easier. I also won't count returning aliens as two, one alien per season. So, let's have a count of the first series of Doctor Who and how many monsters or aliens there were. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. With one episode having humans as the enemies and the other two having repeat aliens. Now out of all 7 of these episodes, the alien was an enemy in some way, in the sense that their motivation for what they were doing against the Doctor was clear. For instance, the Slitheen were trying to take over the world, and the empty child was alien medical nanobots confusing the boy's DNA with the gas mask attached to him with human DNA and fixing humans so that they were exactly like the empty child. They all made sense, and they were direct mysteries and motivations for the Doctor to stop. It's also worth pointing out in the second episode they were really putting the budget in and trying to get as many aliens on screen as possible, almost like a scene from a Star Wars cantina. So not only was there a good variety of aliens, but every single one mattered in every single episode. And I am now going to go into the new series. There are 6 episodes in season 11 with aliens. The other 4 either have humans as their enemies, or in the case of the final episode, the return of the alien from the first episode. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. There is one less episode with aliens as the main point. Or is there? Now, I don't want to keep you waiting, so I'm just going to go through some character motivations of the aliens that aren't particularly good. In the Saranga problem, we have an alien called the Ting, or Ting. If you want a synopsis of this alien, it is essentially Nibbler from Futurama but eats inorganic material instead of organic material. The whole point of the alien is that it is hungry for power and eating parts of the ship, meaning that the ship cannot reach its destination while the Ting is on board. If your alien is a mindless eating machine, I would call that unimaginative, and it will leave a lot of people being disinterested in the alien. The whole point in the episode was the character development of the other characters on the ship, but that was also uninteresting, so don't add an alien in just to seem like you have an imagination, Chibnall. It doesn't work. There are more examples of the aliens being completely uninteresting and not adding to the story in any way, apart from at best to be a red herring. A good example of this would be the demons of the Punjab. Now in this episode, the aliens, known as the Thajarians, are known by the Doctor as to be assassins. Now they look like they're dangerous, which is good. You could always do with an intimidating enemy. The thing is, they're not enemies. It turned out at the end of the episode the whole reason they were there was that their planet was destroyed in a big war while they were absent being assassins, So now all they do is travel the universe and time to look for places that have people fallen in battle or fallen to death and not been witnessed or have been forgotten in time. This is a good concept, but again not the focus of the episode, so ultimately they are there for absolutely no reason, and there was a better way to write these aliens in if you need them at all. But ultimately this story was about, again, the character development of the humans who weren't the companions. The companions were again there just to watch people interact with each other and not really save the day in any way. This is again uninteresting and a waste of time. You can't just add an alien in that doesn't do anything, but apart from being a red herring or something that needs to in the end be saved or protected, while at the same time having human conflict and human emotions portrayed in such a big way for the rest of the episode. It ends up being disinteresting for the audience in regard to the aliens, and ends up with them being confused as why they're there in the first place. Whereas in the Russell T Davies episodes, the aliens were the focus. He made sure that the character development was around the aliens' motives and actions, not have the aliens in the background while the humans interacted with each other constantly. This is where I compare the good writing of Russell T Davies to the bad writing of Chris Chibnall, and I mean that in an objective way. Of course there are more examples of this, but that's all I'm going to go through for now, because the rest of the examples really directly tie in to the subject of the other parts of the video, such as the characters and the themes behind the episodes. But there's one more thing I want to touch upon with the bad writing in the new series of Doctor Who, and that is the total lack of consistency when it comes to the writing. The biggest non-character based culprit of this is really arachnids in the UK, but before we get into it I want to go through some other things to really set what I'm talking about here. Firstly, in the episode Rosa, there is a whole scene about Rose's arrest on the bus that catalysed the civil rights movement, and the Radio Times after every episode of Doctor Who asks how accurate it is, and in the case of Rosa Parks it turned out to be accurate right down to the words the participants are believed to have said to each other. That takes quite a lot of effort. In the episode after Arachnids in the UK, there is an explanation of antimatter. The Doctor explains antimatter basically straight from Wikipedia and translates it so a 10-year-old can understand, which is fine, and an actual scientist from CERN who is working with antimatter says that it's pretty much mark for mark information. Although I do still have some gripes with how the antimatter scene went, but that's for the character section. So why then in Arachnids in the UK would they put out obvious scientific inaccuracies such as spiders hating the smell of garlic, which they don't really care about, it's just an old wives' tale. A vinegar line poured would stop a spider. Well, spiders don't like wet surfaces, and some of the acid in vinegar might stop them, but the amount that they drop in that episode wouldn't stop them, according to a spider expert. And finally, they say spiders keep growing for as long as they live, and this is again untrue. So my question to the writers would be, why would you go to all the effort to get the antimatter description accurate, and to get the Rosa Parks bus boycott protest historically accurate, but then when it comes to spiders in the UK, you throw all that accuracy out the window simply to tell a good story, or what you think is a good story? It simply comes across as lazy and inconsistent. You'd rather have style over substance. I mean, you could have come up with any other explanation than having to throw untrue scientific facts in there, interspersed between actual scientific facts, which they do get some facts about spiders right, and should absolutely be commended on. But when they blatantly write inconsistently like this, then they need to be called out on it. While on the subject of inconsistency with the arachnids in the UK, it is shown that spider attacks, or giant spider attacks throughout Sheffield, are shown all over the place, and at the end of the episode, they only deal with the spiders inside the hotel. What about all the rest of the spiders loose in Sheffield? It's never answered, and it just seems like a thing that you'd have to worry about if you were the Doctor, but no, not in this case. But that's all the examples I want to give of inconsistency purely on a storytelling form for now, because there are much, much worse cases of it throughout the characters, which is what we are going to get into now. For this section, I'm simply going to be talking about the main characters in this series, which, as shown in the background from left to right, goes Graham, Ryan, the Doctor, and Yaz. And luckily there isn't much to talk about all these characters because they're all fantastically uninteresting, maybe with the exception of Graham. So I'm going to do this from least interesting to most interesting in my personal opinion. And honestly, from the things I read about fans of Doctor Who, this seems to be the general consensus with people. You can call it anecdotal, but it doesn't really matter since we're going to be talking about them all anyway. So, I find the least interesting character to be Yaz. Now, the first time we're introduced to Yaz, she is called to a dispute in a Sheffield suburb, where someone has smashed someone else's car window with a hammer over a parking argument. She is in police gear and obviously a policewoman. The way she diffuses the situation is by telling them both that they need to cool down the argument, the responsible parties pay for the damages and agree that parking is a nightmare. Now, I'm not going to go too deeply into the fact that police officers are usually in pairs and usually have to do more work than simply tell people to calm down and pay for things when they see crimes are committed. After this, she is reporting to the police station on walkie-talkie. It's clear that she is bored at her current state as a low-level police officer and wants something more, so she is sent out to Ryan to look at the mysterious craft that has hit Earth, where Ryan found it. So far we know that Yaz is a police officer and that she is fairly ambitious in pursuing her career, or at least things that are meaningful to her. It is also the last time she actually has any impact on any episode for the rest of the season. I mean, honestly, it's never actually mentioned in any other episode that Yaz is a police officer. And bear in mind, in 2 future episodes, she sees her family. None of them ask how work at the force is going or anything remotely like that. And then in the New Year's special, a Dalek, spoilers by the way, but a recon Dalek goes around and takes control of a woman who then beats up a policeman and takes his uniform. Needless to say, it should have been Yaz who had been taken over. It would have made for a much better episode. I'm just saying it doesn't make much sense to establish that she is a policewoman who wants to really get further up in terms of her career to then have it either never mentioned again and have her constantly travelling with the Doctor and it never being established that she's actually still working. But even then, she seems to do little more in each episode than constantly try and relate what the Doctor is saying back to relatable things in the modern day. This is really exacerbated in the Saranga conundrum, where whenever the Doctor is talking about the antimatter accelerator, she says, "Oh, just like CERN in the real world." Or in the same episode, when the medical staff mention they have cameras in their gear, she says, "Oh, just like my police camera that I wear on me when I'm going around policing." This is the only time it's actually established again that she is a policewoman in the entire series, and it's nothing more than to try and oddly relate it back to the real world, which it feels really awkward. It's also established in the episode Rosa when she is outside hiding from the racist cop, talking to Ryan that she is Muslim. This also never comes up again in the series, apart from maybe you could argue in The Demons in Punjab, where she tries to meet her older family in the past. But the only vaguely established thing about her Muslim heritage there is that when her grandmother is getting married, they do a Hindu ceremony, or at least a mixture of a Muslim and Hindu one. But it's not made clear because it seemed like a really secular ceremony with no mention of religion, God or creed, which is very odd. I mean, for God's sake, the Doctor herself does the ceremony. This wouldn't happen in any religious place or wedding, especially wedding. She seems to be there for moral support for Ryan from time to time, but honestly, that's not needed at all when you've got Graham there who's trying to be his granddad, but we'll get into that later. If I'm going to be harsh, I'd say that Yaz is a pointless and useless character, but if I'm going to be nice, I'd say she was underutilised and underdeveloped, but they're pretty much the same thing to me. She is honestly replaceable with any other writing tool to get the characters in the situations that they were in. I think she should have just been brought along to the Demons of Punjab and not been on any other adventure. She didn't really add anything apart from bringing her family in who were also uninteresting. I mean, for God's sake, the only thing we find out is that basically their dad is an environmentalist. And her mum was working at a hotel, which she subsequently got fired from instantly, but the reason for that will be saved for later. But there was absolutely no need for her to be brought with the time machine apart from maybe Demons of Punjab. And that's absolutely everything I have to say about Yaz. There is just so little to say about her, I don't want to go on. The next character who is of slight interest is the Doctor herself. I'm going to go right out the gate and say that I was fairly disappointed with the Doctor this season. Jodie Whittaker is a fine actress, and I think I'm going to put most of the bad parts of the Doctor's character straight down to writing, because Jodie Whittaker did what she could with the writing. It's just unfortunate that she did little more in this entire series than try and take the moral high ground in every case instead of being more morally ambiguous as the Doctor has been in previous seasons. Part of the problem with that is that she ends up just looking like a massive hypocrite and ends up doing things that seem worse off than just doing the things that the morally bad people the writers are trying to show do anyway. This point is really shown in Arachnids in the UK, where the person who is painted as morally bad, I mean for God's sake, is a caricature of Trump, but it turns out he has a safe room full of weaponry that he wants to use against the giant spiders that have been shown to cocoon people and eat them. When you're establishing something that is a direct threat to human life, I would argue that you can have the perfect moral justification to defend yourself with weaponry. However, it was established in the second episode, The Ghost Monument, that the Doctor is absolutely anti-gun. It's never explained why, so her answer in Arachnids in the UK is to trap all the spiders that has been established grow until they die in a tiny panic room where they will eventually either all eat each other or suffocate to death, sounding like a really painful and awful experience for the spiders, which she said are misunderstood and technically innocent. Again, morally hypocritical. But then at the end of the episode, when the biggest mother spider is seen struggling to breathe and climb walls and live in general, the Doctor says that we should just leave it to die, but the Trump caricature just comes in and shoots it a few times with a gun, and the Doctor is like, why did you do that? It was dying anyway. And he says, oh, well, it was a mercy killing then. I did it a favour. And you can make a much better moral justification for the Trump caricature you made than you can for the Doctor. The Doctor seems to just want things to die slowly, which is directly in conflict with the episode where London was in space riding a giant space whale. The Doctor was just going to kill it in that episode because he thought it was being tortured. Well, it was being tortured, but it turns out it was just trying to save them. He didn't understand that. But it's been shown that the Doctor is perfectly fine with killing things if it thinks it's going to put it out of his misery. I said it wasn't explained why she is so against weaponry, and in the last episode, the finale, apparently, the Doctor gets out a load of weaponry to deal with killer robots that she knows are on the ship. Ryan points out her hypocrisy and she just says, well, I've got to lay ground rules and then they're perfectly flexible. This isn't a good justification. It was a much better just to say the Doctor lies, they're actually good in certain situations, and yeah, we probably should have used them earlier. Have her admit mistakes, but she has to be this perfect, morally superior being in this entire series, which has never been the case before. Questions on morality are really what gave Doctor Who depth, and especially the character of the Doctor in previous seasons. I get you want to try and reboot it, but she's just seemed like a Mary Sue when it comes to morality. But instead it's just made her look like a massive hypocrite who isn't that interesting, because she has absolutely no thought process behind her, it seems. There's obviously more moralising than this coming from the Doctor, but I am going to save it for the later sections. But for now I want to critique a bit more about the character herself. As you can see in the background, she has a sonic screwdriver. Now the sonic screwdriver building scene is actually quite fun in the first episode. She just goes in a workshop in Sheffield and builds one herself. This shows that she can overcome difficulty with her brains. That's all well and good, but it turns out that the sonic screwdriver she has made can do literally everything for her. All it does is turn the machine into a deus ex machina whenever it needs to, or whenever the writers have forced themselves into a corner. In the older episodes of Doctor Who in the David Tennant and Christopher Eccleston era, the sonic screwdriver was little more than a magic device to open doors and scan things so that they knew what they contained, or gave the Doctor clues as to what was going on, such as scan life forms to see what its makeup is in terms of chemicals. But this season it really does seem to just be the mother of all tools. I mean, it stops a Dalek firing its laser, breaks a mirror that was a portal to another dimension, and lets her swap jobs with Graham when the tag that gave them their jobs was given to them. And also, on that point, can I just mention that they were going to give the Doctor, after they scanned her and found out she was a super genius, or should have anyway, they were going to give her the job of cleaning lady. What the hell? I get it was supposed to be a joke, but you know, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I did giggle, but when I thought about it, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. But back on topic, this really does take away from the Doctor, because it means that she doesn't have to actually think a way out of a situation when her tool just does everything for her anyway. I mean, getting through a door, that isn't that interesting using a sonic screwdriver, and there's not many ways you can find an interesting way to open a door without a sonic screwdriver. But that doesn't give an excuse to just have a Dalek have its weapon malfunction because she used a sonic screwdriver. They use an excuse like, oh, you're not in sync yet, but honestly, you can find better ways to write yourself out of being shot. And finally, remember how I said the Doctor was a bit moralising before? Well, I'm going to directly read out a transcript of her having an argument with a terrorist. This is in the episode Kablam, and the character Charlie is trying to have half of Kablam's customer base killed by killer bubble wrap. Yes, I do mean that. And this is the confrontation they have. For context, this is based on a company based directly off Amazon, obviously, where robots are basically taken over the workforce, so there is a government plan to have 10% of the workers being organic or human, basically. So, Charlie starts off, 10%, they want us to be grateful that 10% of people get to work. What about the other 90%? What about our futures? Because without action, next time it will be 7%, then 5%, then 1%. I am stronger than you. I am not going to stand by and accept it. People like me, my generation, we change things. We make things happen. The Doctor. Even if it costs people lives, you kill a load of customers at Klablam, let the system take the fall for it, erode people's trust in automation, make people angry. Charlie, imperfect technology, without a conscience, machines malfunction, that's what they do. Graham, nah mate, that's what you're doing, seriously malfunctioning. Charlie, I'm not your mate. The Doctor says except Kablam's system does have a conscience. It's been fighting you, Charlie. It knew it. It sent messages across the galaxy begging for help. That teammate in Slade's office, it was coming for you. And then Kira, it took her, knowing how you felt about her, to show you how it would feel. Because how you feel right now about Kira is how those families and friends will feel when your plan goes off. Charlie says he doesn't care. Doctor, I think you do. I think you came here with a plan, but you didn't expect to fall in love. But that's what happens. Use it, Charlie. Learn from it, please. Charlie, no, no. If that's the price to change how everyone on the planet sees technology, then it is worth it for the cause. This isn't a cause. You're not an activist. This is cold-blooded murder. Charlie, we can't let the system take control. Doctor, the systems aren't the problem. How people use it and exploit the system, that's the problem. People like you. I don't care what you think, the delivery goes ahead. And then he activates his terrorist plan. Now, there's quite a few things I want to go through here. So, to get the simple statistics out of the way, when he says 10%, what about the other 90% that don't get to work? That's not how that works. The 10% working there won't account for 10% of the population of the planet. It will account for a lot less, and there will likely be other jobs available other than that just at that plant. This is trying to get across a message that automations are getting rid of people, but in reality, people find other jobs that we don't even know about yet. This is called creative destruction. I'm not getting into economics in this video. The next convoluted message is about taking control of systems. Now, it was really hard to tell what type of system they were going on about. I couldn't tell if they were going on about purely mechanical systems with modern technology, or if they were going on about capitalist systems. I mean, that's part of the problem, but then they say that Charlie is trying to exploit the system. I wouldn't say arming every single delivery man with a bomb is exploiting the system. I'd say that's trying to take down the system by using it for evil. Because exploit means more try and use the system to its fullest benefit with little regard for the people or the system itself. Whereas he's more hijacked it to use it for an unintended purpose. It's not really exploiting, it's more hijacking. You may call it semantics, but it made the entire message of the episode very confusing. However, the rest of this speech seems to be the Doctor saying that terrorism is bad, which I don't know anyone who disagrees with that. Again, this comes down to writing, but it really is part of the character of the Doctor that they have written. She is massively hypocritical and doesn't understand a damn thing she's actually moralising about, and this is a theme that is shown throughout the series with the whole gun thing she has going, and this thing of not understanding what she's even talking about, because I don't understand what she's talking about here, and I can't really see anyone who agrees on what she does talk about. But that's about everything I had for the Doctor. She is a moralising hypocrite with a merry screwdriver. I like that joke, I'm keeping it in. The last two characters are Graham and Ryan, and these two characters are generally intertwined given that Graham is an adopted granddad of Ryan. But first I'll go through my critiques of each character individually, and we'll start off with Ryan. Now, in the first episode it's established that Ryan has dyspraxia, where he can't ride a bike properly. Basically it means that his hand-eye coordination and doing other physical activities is harder for him. He can master them, it's just a lot harder than the average individual. This only comes up a couple more times in the season, one where Ryan is trying to climb a ladder and has a bit of difficulty just before he actually gets on it, but seems to climb it fine anyway, and another time is where he needs to jump around on the ridiculous conveyor belt scene in the Kablam episode. This would be fine if it was consistent. In the second episode, when the Doctor warns him not to use guns, he goes out and has perfect hand-eye coordination and manages to hit every single sniper bot on the first try. Anyone with dyspraxia would have a bit of trouble if they have trouble with hand-eye coordination. It just seems to be a thing that comes up every now and then to show that some people in the world have dyspraxia, without actually having any consequences or showing it as a disability in any way, ultimately just making it pointless. Now there is a second thing with Ryan that made absolutely no sense to me, and that's the fact that his father is essentially not there for him when he needs to be, which is where Graham comes in, but I'll get to the two of them later. In the first episode we see Grace, Ryan's grandmother, die, and they're at the funeral, but Ryan's father doesn't turn up, establishing that he can't rely on him as a father figure, and so Graham tries to step in, but again I'll get into that later. The issue of Ryan's dad doesn't come up again until the New Year's special. I'm not joking when I say this, but Ryan and his dad only talk to each other in 2 scenes. Every time before the second scene, he is told by Graham and Ryan on separate occasions that he hasn't been there for Ryan when he should have been. He has been a lousy father, and he says he wants to change that. And now for the cafe scene. Now, this is a scene where Ryan really gets to talk to his dad about how much of a bad father he's been, and Ryan's dad says back that he wants to try and change all that. The thing is that you really have to show this, but the first thing that we see in this scene is Ryan's dad trying to sell the owner of a cafe his microwave. It turns out later that this microwave is used to kill the Dalek in the episode, but seriously, if you're going to try and reconnect with your son, don't try and make business arrangements while you are there with him. That looks really bad and like you don't actually care, and I found it one of the most confusing scenes in the New Year's special. But then later, after they've used the microwave to take away the Dalek's armour, the Dalek then attaches itself to Ryan's dad, and as Ryan's dad is being dragged into a sun by the Dalek, Ryan goes over to him and says, "I love you, I forgive you, I'll give you a second chance." Now, this may be realistic in the circumstances, but I highly doubt that after everything that has happened with your dad, with him not being there for you, and with him trying to sell a microwave oven in front of you when he's trying to reconnect with you, I wouldn't exactly say those words. I'd say, maybe I'll give you a second chance, but I don't think I'd say I love or forgive you at that point, but that might just be me, and I just found it very forced. It was a very forced scene. It seemed Chris Chibnall really wanted them to reconnect, but just doesn't seem to understand how human emotions or interactions work, so he just wrote it in anyway. Honestly, that was a big problem with this season of Doctor Who. None of the characters felt human. But getting back to a realistic father figure aside, we will now move on to Graham's character. Now, Graham and Ryan actually have the same thing that makes them good characters, which is they actually act like companions. They ask the Doctor questions, they challenge Arno morality, even though she answers like a lame moron. But they are there written as if they're real people to an extent, but I'll get into that. And ultimately, Ryan was there to ask questions, and Graham was there to ask questions and pop off jokes that landed quite well in my opinion. Which is basically a mixture of what previous Doctor Who companions have been all about. This is good, keep that up, and they should absolutely be in the next season of Doctor Who. But now we'll get on to the confusing nature of Ryan and Graham's relationship. Now, Graham had married Ryan's grandmother, and hence he was giving the eulogy at her funeral. It was made clear that he loved her very much, and was clearly going to be there for Ryan, since that Ryan's grandmother had passed away. Now, I would say the connection between Ryan and Graham overall this season was well done, but it was supposedly supposed to be symbolised, I think, by a fist bump, and Ryan calling him Grandad or refusing to. Throughout the series, whenever Ryan and Graham did anything together that could be considered overcoming an obstacle, Graham would put his fist up for a fist bump with Ryan, and also constantly ask him to call him Grandad. Now they do end up doing this in the penultimate episode, It Takes You Away, but I have a very big criticism on this that may seem like a nitpick. In the episode It Takes You Away, there is a parallel universe that they all go into that turns out to be created by a sentient being. So he manages to reconnect with the alternative universe's version of Grace, and they have a chat about Ryan and everything like that. The thing is, Ryan never goes to the alternate universe and meets the alternate resurrected version of Grace, his grandmother. And he's the one that really needed a deep understanding of what he needed in life, which was some sort of parental figure that should have been Graham. Thing is, Graham talking to her, talking about how much he misses her and all that, is all well and good. But they both should have been there, and Ryan should have had a talking to by his grandmother as exactly why he needs a parental figure from Graham. But this never happens. At the end of the episode, before they get in the TARDIS, Graham has a moment to himself to reflect on the events of the day, and Ryan goes over to him and explains to him that he doesn't need to miss her too much because he misses her as well and understands what he's going through, and after this calls him Gramps, which Graham quite likes. Now Ryan's not really had the experience, or let's call it the epiphany, to actually change his ways and accept Graham as his grandfather fully. So calling him Gramps at the end of this episode didn't make too much sense to me. If it were me, I would have done it 4 episodes earlier in the Saranga conundrum, where they both help another alien man give birth to a baby, and after this they seem to realise, after a long conversation I might add between Ryan and the soon-to-be father about why it's important for a child to have a dad, or at least a father figure, Ryan after that doesn't fully connect with his dad, which is what the fist bump and calling him Grandad seems to be symbolising. He does it instead in a later episode where Graham has an epiphany talking to a dead relative rather than Ryan. Although Ryan does spend the episode with a blind girl whose father is borderline abusing her so that he can go to the alternate universe to see his dead wife. So it may have something to do with that, but honestly I find it a lot more convincing if he met his mum and had an epiphany about it that way. And in the next episode, Ryan and Graham do fist bump after they take out the returning Tim Shaw. I mean, this is fine, but I still would have had it after they were both a birthing partner. This is, again, very bad writing and a massive blunder between what was a really good story, or character arc, with Ryan and Graham. Luckily, this is the only nitpick or criticism I really have of them. Of course, there are others, they're not perfect characters, but generally compared to the Doctor and Yaz, they're a hell of a lot better than those two characters. But while we're on the subject, why do these characters never change clothes? They go in the past to the time of King James, they go into the past at the time of Rosa Parks, so they should be wearing period clothing for these. But they're not. You've got Yaz constantly in her leather jacket, you've got Graham looking like a Monday uncle, and you've got Ryan again in Monday clothing. It just doesn't make too much sense to me, but this just seems to either be down to laziness or budgeting, but it really does take you out of the experience when the Doctor is being dunked as a witch in the crazy clothes she decided to wear. But with that comes the end of my criticism of the main characters, and so I'm going to now move on to something that you may want to skip if you don't want to hear criticisms of left-wing politics. And yes, I am going to go there. The sentient being exploits people's deepest desires, and in Graham's case it was to see Grace again. When it comes to many forms of modern day media, having a left-wing bias tends to absolutely destroy an entire franchise. This is seen from Marvel's declining in comic book sales to Gillette's recent advertisement that is basically propaganda for saying that men are bad and boys should be treated as defective girls, showing that fathers are completely interchangeable with one another which is so untrue I can only assume the director of this advert never had a father. On the subject of fathers though, I will say this season at least didn't politicise fatherlessness. As I said, I think that was more purely just a writing fault when it comes to Chris Chibnall, rather than trying to politicise it, which then made the writing bad. However, there are a lot more forced in politics, which I am going to go with what I think is the most important aspect first. In the Russell T Davies series of Doctor Who, there was a character called Harriet Jones who was a Member of Parliament, subsequent Prime Minister and then ex-Prime Minister, which she made clear to everyone even when everyone knew who she was. I think this is important because it really shows that Doctor Who split itself from political reality. Any comparisons you can make to the real world through Doctor Who's fictional politics are purely interpretation and speculation. This has all been thrown out the window with a single line in the new series of Doctor Who. As mentioned in a previous part, there is a direct Trump caricature. It is mentioned by Graham, who strings off a few jokes that are quite funny, that he's running for president in 2020, and then a backup scientist character says he's only doing it because he's hated Trump for decades, to which he replies, "Don't mention that name." I agree with him, they absolutely should not have mentioned Trump. This one line has established something that should never ever have been established in Doctor Who, and that's that real politics are in effect in the fictional world of Doctor Who. This is bad for two reasons. One, it's a flimsy shield to make sure that Trump basically can't say anything bad about this character in Doctor Who, since they are trying to establish he hates Donald Trump. But that doesn't really work when you've made him obviously Donald Trump in every other way possible. He's a billionaire who also handles a waste disposal company which don't really care for environmental standards. This is shown later when they go underground and see the landfill that has both the dead spiders from the scientist woman's lab and other chemicals from other labs. This is the excuse to make the spiders grow. And this brings me nicely into another topic I want to get into. In most of these episodes of Doctor Who, there is a clear theme and message that is trying to get across to the viewer, and it is very, very thinly veiled. In 7 out of the 10 episodes, I can easily name the theme that they were going after, and each one of these themes tends to have a left-wing bias. In the interest of time, I'm going to go through each one very quickly. The theme of Rosa is racism. The theme of Arachnids in the UK is environmentalism. The theme of Demons of the Punjab is borders. The theme of Kablam is automation and capitalism. The theme of the Witchfinders is men dominating women and women's scapegoating. And the Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos is blind faith. In each episode there is a line or a scene that make these themes very clear, and I'm going to explain each one briefly. In Rosa, we have a scene with Ryan and Yaz hiding from a racist sheriff who is searching the room with the Doctor and Graham inside. They are discussing about modern day racism and hate crime, and honestly, these statistics I'm going to go through later and prove just how insignificant hate crime actually is. The scene is clearly there to have modern day problems of racism tried to be compared to the racism of the day. Although in their defence, Yaz does mention that people like Rosa Parks did help in the cause, but they are still trying to compare it, which I think is disingenuous. Next, in Arachnids in the UK, as we've already said, we have the scene where they see the landfill underground. That appears to have had no regulation as to what goes there, and it subsequently makes the giant spiders. Since these writers were the ones to bring modern day politics into this, I am going to point out that on the website for Sheffield City Council, they have a whole section explaining the Environmental Protection Act of 1990 and how you can't contaminate land. It is made out that this is okay in this episode when it clearly isn't under law. In the episode's Demons of Punjab, there is clearly an anti-border message in there, with the rural Indian family having a split, where one of the brothers puts down a border between Pakistan and India, India being for Hindus and Pakistan being for Muslims, where his brother says things aren't that simple. Later in the episode, when the Doctor is performing the wedding ceremony, her Mary screwdriver is used to drop the border pegs to show that the individuals are more important than the borders. Now, agree with this or not, but if you put this in a historical context, most Hindu Indians voted in the Indian Hindu Congress, while most Muslims voted in favour of the Muslim League, both of which advocated the partition. So for the attitudes of India at the time, it may be that simple, although to be fair, the Wikipedia article does also mention that views of rural Indians isn't that obvious, so this could be historically accurate for just them. But I'm sure anyone seeing the majority of the votes going on identity of religion, then really it is quite that simple for the time. In Kablam there is a government policy to have 10% of all workforces be made up of humans. Now, as we went through in the earlier part, the speech made by the terrorist and the doctor makes absolutely no sense, no matter how you try and frame it. His stats are wrong, and we have had absolutely no reason to believe that people are actually unhappy, as all the workers seem fairly happy that they have a job, and we see absolutely nothing of the planet being in disarray because people don't have jobs. Personally, I'll just put it down to the writer having no idea how capitalism works. In The Witchfinder, the Doctor complains that King James isn't listening to her as Chief General Witchfinder because she is a woman, even though he appears to respect the regional Witchfinder, who is also a woman in the episode. But the Doctor says out loud, these really are hard times for women. I think if we put it in the context of the time in which there was constant medieval warfare going on and disease everywhere, I think we'll find that it was a hard time for all. But women can't be Witchfinder generals, so it's much worse for them. In the season finale, the Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos, the Doctor has a big speech to the two people trying to shrink the Earth into a canister, that their faith has been misguided and they are blindly following Tim Shaw, who returned, all because of a coincidence that he happened to land on that planet at the exact time they were looking for their god. Now the problem here again is framing. It's framed in a very much religious way, in that people will follow anything if they think it will further their religious goals. I should point out at this point that I don't actually necessarily disagree with these messages. It's just really, really obvious pandering in at least 6 of the 10 episodes, and even in the other episodes there are one-off lines that are just put in to do nothing more than pander. They don't add anything. The biggest example of this is the sly jab at Brexit in the episode Resolution on New Year's Day. The Doctor needs to contact UNIT, and it turns out UNIT has stopped all operations as all the international partners decided to stop funding. This didn't add anything apart from telling us that UNIT had disbanded essentially, and that Brexit was happening. There was no need for it. They could have removed this scene and not mentioned UNIT, and the exact same thing would have happened. It was a pointless little joke and jab at Brexit, and it's just been everywhere this season. I think it's part of the reason people hate it. But now I want to bring us back round to the Rosa episode, because it was this scene with Yaz and Ryan talking about Monday racism that really griped me. They go on about hate crime and how they get abused in public and all that, and it is a thinly veiled attempt to bring attention to hate crime. And since it's clearly incorporated modern world politics and goings on, I've decided to get up some statistics on hate crime and go through just how little it actually affects people. All my stats come from Crime in England and Wales Office for National Statistics page and the government's own hate crime statistics. Both links can be found in description. Now, if we actually take a look at the statistics, we'll find that between April and March 2017 to 2018, there were 55,557 hate crimes reported. From this, 4% came under the crimes criminal damage and arson, violence against another person, and a public order offence. So if we take the percentage of that and apply it to the number, we get around 53,334.72, or 5 if you want to keep it simple. So if we go from the general overall crime statistics of these 3 types of offences, we get a number of 2,811,191 general crimes for those 3 offences. So I decided to try and get the percentage of this, and you can see my working there. We take the number of hate crimes under those offences, divide it all by the total number of offences and times it by 100, and we end up with this nice long number that can be rounded straight to 1.9. So we had a whole episode about racism in 1950s America with the segregation and Jim Crow laws, and we try and compare this to modern day hate crimes, which have a sketchy definition in the first place. If you want the definition, it is this: an offence which the victim considers to be driven by hostility towards their race, religion, sexual orientation, disability, or transgender identity. Now, the problem with this is that it's entirely defined by the victim, so even if objectively the man or woman committing the crime was not a racist, if the person was black and they perceived it as being racist, then it counts as a hate crime. So the actual figure of this is probably less than 2%, but even at 2% it is completely incomparable to the total injustices we saw in Rosa. And it's things like trying to bring problems in the past or other cultures into the present day Western world. It doesn't work. It makes it look like pandering and ultimately makes people think that you have no idea what you're talking about. As about 10 minutes of research completely destroys the narrative trying to be brought up in every Doctor Who episode, as I have done throughout this video. I could of course go on and on, but this is the end of this section, as I would like to now talk about the aftermath of what has happened and how people received the new Doctor Who. So, let's move on. So how was this season of Doctor Who received? Well, if we are to go off the IMDb scores for each episode, then the lowest score for the season was the Soranga Conundrum, which got 5.2 stars, and yet the highest was actually joint between Rosa and the Woman Who Fell to Earth. And if we are to take the average of the episodes, this including the New Year's special, then we get a total average of 6.28 stars. Let's again compare this to the Russell T Davies series, with the highest episode being Blink with 9.8, and the lowest being Fear Her at 6.1. It's also worth pointing out that this is the only episode that has a rating lower than the average of the new season with Jodie Whittaker. That is a hell of a decline. And just wait till you find out that the average of seasons 1 to 4, this including Christmas specials, adds up to 8.14, and then the rest of a lovely long number. But still, that is a decrease of just under 2 stars between seasons 1 to 4 and season 11. Again, that's a hell of a decline. So there's been a drop of fans giving Doctor Who a rating of about 2 stars, which is quite a drop, but how are the viewing figures? Now, according to Digital Spy, the first episode, The Woman Who Fell to Earth, had a total overnight viewing of 10.95 million people, which is about right for a Doctor Who opening. So clearly people were willing to give it a chance. By episode 5 this had dropped to 7.76 million viewers, which the article claims is normal for a Doctor Who season, and from what I understand this is true. So overall in the season the viewing figures are about the same for the average Doctor Who season. This is fine, but I'm wondering what the viewing figures will be like next season, because I know I won't be watching it. But now we get on to the big one. The Christmas specials are always the biggest and most viewed Doctor Who episodes, with the Christmas Invasion, which was the least watched episode in the Russell T Davies series, bringing in 9.8 million viewers. Resolution saw a total consolidation figure of 7.13 million, and this was on New Year's Day. So that's just over 2.5 million less viewers than the David Tennant era. That again is a hell of a drop. And this is why I say I'm interested in what next season's viewing figures are going to be like, because clearly the big episode, the one that's supposed to be most popular, turned out to rank around less than the mid-series viewing figures. But enough about numbers and all that, let's go look at what some people have said about this. Avoiding criticisms of all the political correctness for now, I'm just going to go through a couple of articles that really do show where the problem is for people who are on the politically correct side of the spectrum. In the ball, 5 people write their thoughts on season 11, and all of them are pretty much saying the same thing. There's absolutely no episode they can pick out as very good, or even their favourite. They all just seem average and wet. There was a lack of ambition and it was all very bland, so this is all just criticisms of the writing really, because it was just dire as I have been through. Another common criticism is that the companions are just, especially Yaz, they all mention Yaz is just there as an underdeveloped character who has absolutely nothing to add. There are mixed opinions about Jodie Whittaker, but I think the main criticism that people have is that she lacks authority and an on-screen presence. She seems to think gurning out is a substitute for acting, and she does basically just read like she is reading straight from a script sometimes, which I have gone through earlier. And now from a article in the New Statesman, which is a socialist paper, a reviewer asks, why isn't Jodie Whittaker's Doctor Who the lead character of her own damn show? The impression you're left with is that the showrunner Chris Chibnall is simply more interested in his male characters than his female ones. Now, after he goes on about how the Ryan and Graham storyline is good but annoying because it's about two men, he then says this paragraph, and this is what buggers me. Despite being the ostensible lead, Whittaker was given no material as meaty as Walsh or Cole. This may have been a conscious choice to decentre the Doctor a bit, and that may even be a good idea. All that Lonely God stuff has probably been gone as far as it could, but they overshot and made the first female male Doctor kind of, well, wet. She just didn't get to do very much. The impression that you're left with is that Chibnall is simply more interested in his male characters than his female ones. Or my takeaway from this would be it's a lot easier to write about a father-son type relationship trying to be formed than it is about the Doctor being a woman. Because that's the whole thing that was riding on this. We're getting the first female Doctor. Where is the substance? The Guardian do a recap of each episode the day after they are aired, and in the comments people are leaving comments saying how bad they think the new Doctor Who is, and the most popular ones seem to say the same things. Criticisms like this, man. I've never been so bored watching Doctor Who as of tonight. I don't think it was the episode which might have shone brightly, but this is a one-note series. The dialogue is clunky, Tosin Cole couldn't outact my front door, Jodie can't do the big speeches the Doctor is famous for, there are no baddies, no threats to the Doctor or anyone, barely any sci-fi, and in the end it turns out we're the real baddies after all. It's all just so samely, joyless, and so lacking in verve and sparkle. For context, that was about the episode Demons of Punjab. And people praising it, 2 comments down, are saying, I wonder if it's just a coincidence that this episode goes out on Remembrance Sunday. No, not just that, but an episode about bloody tragic cost of having to choose to enthrall oneself to a nationalistic fantasy at this moment in British history. But it won't get through, and then he goes on about Brexiteers. And I think this really shows the split in the Doctor Who community. One lot really seem to enjoy the propaganda, and it is propaganda. If you are writing a story around a message, you are writing propaganda instead of the message naturally coming out of the story, which is art. While the other faction is saying that the writing is awful and they don't really care what the message is, they just want to watch an episode of Doctor Who. And honestly, this is where I think all the left-wing political correct propaganda comes into play. It's made the writing terrible. There's no substance to the episode, and stupid jokes, one-liners, and entire themes are what the whole episode is being written around. And naturally, there have been direct criticisms about all the political correctness instead of just the writing. So the stars of the show decided that they are going to reply to this. Doctor Who stars say claims the show is too politically correct are bizarre. Mandip Gill and Tosin Cole say storylines create conversation about broader issues, and this already shows a bit of a problem that I will go into. The stars of Doctor Who have rejected claims that the programme has become too politically correct, defending its storyline as an entertaining reminder of important issues. Recent episodes of the sci-fi show, which the actors recognise have provoked extreme opinions among some viewers commenting online, have covered issues including the US civil rights movement and the bloody 1947 petition of India, understood by many to have been entirely mismanaged by Britain, costing hundreds of thousands of lives and displacing more than 10 million people. Gill and Cole, who play the Doctor's companions Yaz and Ryan, told the Radio Times that broaching these topics could prompt viewers in an entertaining way to think about the broader issues. Everyone's going to have their own opinion. It's what it is, Cole said. The fact that we can give everyone a little friendly, entertaining reminder of these issues is great. Responding to the accusation of being too politically correct, Gill said, "It makes me laugh, because having the words too and correct in the same sentence is really bizarre to me. How can you be too correct about something?" Well, to answer your question there, Miss Gill, I can give you an explanation. The whole point of political correctness is that it's a slight insult into having to be forced into, let's say, manners as the left would call it, or mandatory speech as the right would put it. The thing is that when so many people in the country see it as having to say something to keep people's feelings at bay and have them under control, it seems very, very patronising to those people. So when you are being too politically correct, they are saying that you are focusing too much on political issues instead of good storytelling, and that's people's main problem with it. It is also seems like bashing people over the head with a message that they already agree with anyway to an extent. But I think this last paragraph really sets the tone for why I think it's a bad thing. You do see some extreme comments under news articles. I'm only human and I do check and read them, but they don't bother me, and actually they're creating conversation. And this is the thing. If you are creating conversation as the main point of your show, you haven't created art. You've created propaganda. And that's not a good thing. And with that comes the end of this critique. I do hope you thoroughly enjoyed this video, and I hope that it has been informative as to why Doctor Who has been declining in quality. Since I decided to put a lot of time into this video, I think it's okay to put a bit of self-promotion at the end of my own video. So, if you did enjoy this video and don't enjoy lefty politically correct politics, then you will enjoy the rest of my channel that is very much more opinionated than the attempt I made here to try and be objective and as neutral throughout this as possible. Secondly, I would also like to mention that I'm on Twitter, Mind and Gab, although I'm mainly on Twitter, and I also have a Subscribestar page, so if you feel that my work here has been good enough and you like the rest of my stuff, why not consider donating? Finally, I will mention that long form videos like this will not be commonplace on my channel at the moment. I currently am working in real life and only found myself having a week off in the first week of January, so I decided to make this entire video. Since, as I said, I have been a huge fan of Doctor Who since it was rebooted in 2005, and I've loved watching it ever since, but unfortunately, as of this series, I can't continue watching it as I don't think the show will improve after this. I think it hit a peak a few years ago, I think it declined ever since, and now I think the term go woke, go broke is in full effect on Doctor Who. And that's all I have to say. So, in the meantime, again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you.